Moving on with 17.3, we have the vector class. I'm not going to beat this horse to death because, again, I know you can go through and read the tables, really, and again, the tables are where all of the the baked in functions that we would have here with our vector classes. So what I wanted to do was spend just a couple of moments here to point out some of the definition statements here, and then just a couple of the highlights from the member functions here. And this starts on page 1041. When we were using vectors the same way as we were using arrays in previous chapters, we brute forced a little bit of how it was that we were going to declare them. So what do I mean? We would use, for example, a for loop in order to provide initial values so that we could be sure that we had good data going into actually using those vectors, for instance, or arrays really, inside of any of our programs. So here, that would be our default constructor. The fill constructor here, where we include a size, is just going to give you, a vector of however many elements to start. So if we just include one argument, that is for size. Here, if we include two arguments, size, the other one is value. So we could call, vector int, we would say range, for example, size could be 10 and value would be 0. Or if we have a reason to have -1 in there, we could fill our vector with default values of -1. Whatever it is that makes sense for your development, we can use that here as long as we include whatever our value is as the second argument. We do have, and this is the one I thought that you would find the most useful, is the range constructor. Here, the two keywords we need to include are iterator1 and iterator2. Simply, you would put iterator1 space and iterator2 space, and after that space, you would include a value. So if, for example, we would have vector int range, iterator1 space 0, iterator2 space 10, what that is going to do is create a vector of type integer called range, and the elements of that vector are going to be populated with the numbers from 0 to 10, for example. Now, that's incorrect. They would be 0 to 9, and that's something we would have to determine right away, because that range constructor there is going to return an out of bounds. It's going to throw, rather, an exception. So that's something to be aware of. I wasn't going to mention it that way, but then I screwed up and said 10 instead of 9, and we went into a little bit more of an explanation there than perhaps I would have preferred. Things that you are going to want to take note of here as we're going down through Ultra Mega Mega Table 17-8, the vector member functions. First and foremost is begin, that returns to you an iterator to the first element in the container. So we would call it range.begin if we want to have an iterator point at 0 for our vector called range. Here, constant iterator. The only difference between begin, which is here, and cbegin, which is here, is, as you saw in 17.2 in your own reading, we can use an iterator to change the value that is stored in an element. And we can do that with c.begin. Or with begin, rather. My mistake. Sorry, guys. Here, with cbegin, it is a constant, which means that we cannot change the value that is being pointed to by that iterator. It is not performatively any different. So there's no performance penalty to be paid by choosing begin versus C begin. There is no, like space-wise consideration there that is difference between begin and C begin. Really what it's doing is it is setting up for you as a developer and then the next developer in the chain, a set of rules. And again, the more rules we have, the faster it is that we can work. So by using C begin and by extension there, C end, a constant iterator pointing to the end of the container as opposed to end, what we're doing is we are saying this is for read only. And that's good, right? Because when we say that we're not going to change what those values are that are loaded into the elements there in our vector, it means that we have a rule and we can't break that rule without, either a compile time error, or in this case, that is going to be a compile time error. So do be aware of that. The two things that I'm going to read for you, or leave rather for you to read, are the idea of in place and in place back. In place really is a word. It is the action of placing. So in place means to place. And you'll never guess where that means it's going to go. When you use in place, we are using an argument as an iterator to point to an existing element. So in the previous example, we had our range vector. Those elements would be 0 to 9. In place end is going to point to the next element after the range that we have. In that case, it would be element number 10. So I'm going to let you go through the rest of this 17-7, 17-8 table and read some more of the basic vector operations here. We are going to see a code sample involving the vectors and their operations, but you've used a lot of this already, and it's just in a new, I'm going to use the word container, and I'm going to use a quasi ironically here. It's the same stuff we've used in a new container, and in this case, it's a container class.